Welcome to the podcast where we celebrate innovation for a happy planet. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. If you live on the coast, this is a podcast you might want to pay special attention to. In episode 43, we spoke to George Birch about his establishing oyster beds in order to participate in European nitrogen and carbon credit programs. Today's guest, Matt Campbell, is the founder of NatrX, and he joins us to talk about his business that establishes oyster and coral reefs with a very different goal in mind: to build coastal resilience. So if you're thinking you might need a new bulkhead to protect your property from a storm, you might want to think again. Matt might tell you that a better solution, or at least a complementary one, lies further offshore. But let's hear it from Matt. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Abigail, it's great to be here.
So you are the co-founder of a company called NatrX. What problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, so we're looking at coastal resilience and ecological resilience. So you hear a lot of people talk about coastal resilience, but we want to bring those two things together because as more people are moving to the coast, as you have more development happening, we see a lot of nature being pushed out. And what we want to do is we want to bring that back in to the forefront of how we build in that environment.
And is that because the presence of nature is actually helping the coastal resilience?
Absolutely. And we've seen that over the years of us working, but it's been talked about in academia for a long time. And it's shown that the power of nature and its ability to adapt is unprecedented. And when you look at our man-made infrastructure, when it fails catastrophically. But nature doesn't really fail, it just adapts. But there may be other things that you want to consider, like what kind of habitat is out there, right? And a lot of times people are having trouble getting these projects permitted because there's more and more regulation around this as well. What we can do is we can come in with our platform and help people efficiently come up with a solution for that and then incorporate nature-based features into that overall solution.
Right. So what is your solution?
So what we want to do is we want to provide technologies that enable people to easily implement these types of nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
And so within those technologies, we're working on various aspects of that. One, we're working on analysis tools that are focused on nature-based infrastructure, such as wetlands, reefs, mangroves, and other types of natural features. And then we have additive manufacturing, where we can manufacture structures that are optimized for that environment, both from a stability standpoint, but also from a ecological standpoint. And then we're also looking at ways that we can value that. So if we're protecting habitat, what's the value of that? Is there carbon benefits to doing things in this way? Is there biodiversity benefits of doing things in this way? We want to be able to expose that value to our clients and to others, right?
Tell me about what a process looks like to you.
Sure. So when we think about building on the coast, and especially building with nature-based features, we tend to, as engineers, look at it as a bridge project or something, where it has to withstand a certain storm event, and it's got to have certain predictability about it. The problem is that nature is not as predictable as steel, right? You have to look at it differently. And so the first thing you need to do is understand, how are those natural systems behaving? How have they historically behaved? Yeah. And we may need to bring in domain experts for that, but we may take various types of data that are easily accessible, satellite data or LiDAR data, bathymetry data, to get a sense over time what is happening to that environment. And coastal environments are notoriously dynamic, but you can understand them and you can model that. And so we use AI tools to help us understand what's going on in that environment. And then once we understand that, then we can start to craft a solution around that. But the solution it's something that's going to be more in line with those natural systems and not over-designed. I talk a lot about performance criteria versus design life, and people ask, well, how long does a reef last? Well, there's reefs out in the Gulf of Mexico that are 1,000 years old. So how long do you want it to last, right? but how do you want it to perform? And a lot of times these systems don't operate in a vacuum. You have the oysters that are holding the lower line of the profile together to where they're knocking down waves enough so that where the grasses can grow. So it switched it into a new equilibrium. Those grasses further knock that energy down, and then they start to grow in height because there's settlement of the sediments of that. Then you start to have high marsh, and then you start to have riparian zones. And so this whole thing starts to move into a more natural equilibrium that shoreline would go to without us trying to draw a line. But if we can understand how that works, then we can shift it into that new equilibrium.
Right. So it sounds like your solution isn't just to maybe build a rock wall or just one jetty out. And so would you build an oyster reef?
Absolutely. We build oyster reefs often. And that is, like I said, we're trying to switch that equilibrium, let nature take over, and then do its thing. So I'll give you an example. We have a lot of clients that have a lot of legacy infrastructure that's out on the coastline, specifically in these wetland kinds of areas. And what we'll do is we'll look at where their assets are. We'll look at the vulnerability of the wetlands around those assets, because the wetlands are actually protecting those assets. And typically what they would do is, we have an exposure here. We'll go and we'll throw some like a concrete mattress on it, a rock there. Well, what happens is the environment around it is changing in response to that. And then you might have a bigger problem on your hands. And so what we do is we back up off of that and we say, what is the environment around it doing? Okay, well, these wetlands are in danger. So how can we put in an oyster reef around this area to protect those wetlands that then are protecting that infrastructure?
I mean, can you explain to listeners more about why a reef? I think most people think of reefs as beautiful. Like, what role do they really play in terms of infrastructure? We love to go visit them and snorkel around them and try to wear the right suntan lotion when we're around them. But why are they so important?
The reefs themselves add roughness to the seafloor. And so as waves come from offshore, they encounter this roughness and it dissipates the energy of those waves. So this is just how our coastlines have evolved over millennia. You have these huge reefs that have been out there, but we've mined them in a lot of cases. I mean, most of the roads, especially in the bigger cities, were made out of reefs.
Wow, I did not know that.
And people used to grind up the reefs and they burn the shell to make concrete. And so we've harvested so much of our reef out of the water. And now we have these organic soils. And as sea level rises, more of these organic soils are being exposed and they're eroding away at a faster pace. So we've removed the hard structure away from our coastlines that have made the land more vulnerable. It's a double whammy because as that land erodes, there's less land there to stop when the bigger storms come with the surge. And so then you have penetration further inland because that land is now gone. And so it's a whole system that you have to look at. And if you're taking that bleeding edge away, the next phases are a lot more vulnerable.
So who pays for what type of client is protecting wetlands right now? A municipal project or?
Lots of, we do work with state, municipal, federal, but then there's also private companies that are paying for this, private landowners that are paying for this, nonprofits who have larger missions in protecting wetlands and reefs. So we do a lot of work with nonprofits and helping them achieve their goals.
So you told me a funny story about being in school and suggesting to a professor that an oyster reef might be a good solution to correct some ecological deterioration. And your professor, well, tell us that story.
Sure. Yeah, it's come a long way since then.
And when was this?
Back then, this was in the early 2000s. Yeah. And from Louisiana, so going out in the marshes, you don't see natural rock. It's all brought in from the middle of the U.S., but we do have a lot of oysters. And so I had this crazy idea that, maybe we can use oysters to stop erosion instead of bringing in this rock that ultimately sinks. And no one was really talking about that back then. So when I brought it to some professors, I was in grad school at the time, and they were engineers and working in offshore kind of ocean engineering, and said, well, you can't really design for what an oyster is going to do. It'll die, and you don't have, just kind of thinking about, well, if you have a piece of steel, you know how strong it is, you know how to attach it, you know what those are. But if you're going to deal with a biological organism, how do you even work with that? And basically said, yeah, I don't really want to be on your committee. That doesn't sound like something I want to get involved with. But as I moved on with that, anyways, because I'm stubborn like that.
And you got the last laugh, I think, on this one.
That's right. And later there was a little bit of change in heart, and they wanted to get on my committee because it is fascinating to see what's happening in nature. And then when you can replicate that and use it in a way that it was meant to be used, right? Because we understand it better.
It seems like you have tools, you've created tools to help nature help us. So what are some of those specific tools? You mentioned the planning and the analysis, but you've also been doing you're looking at new materials to build these structures with. You have some printing methods and other methods to create these structures. Can you tell me a bit about that? Because I think some of it's of your own invention.
Yes. Our motivation from the beginning was to develop lots of different technologies to enable more of this to happen and to empower others to do more of this as well. And so part of that is developing this platform that can be expanded. So you mentioned the satellite technology. So that allows us to rapidly plan on a landscape scale. So we're doing thousands of miles of right of way. We're monitoring coastlines of entire countries.
Wow.
You get large scale with that. And so that brings down the cost. And so then that allows us to do more with less. The other technology is something that we developed in-house that you're alluding to. We call it dry forming. And it's a completely new way of forming concrete. And we can create shapes that are very naturalistic, that have lots of structural complexity, that allow for lots of different types of species. So I was talking about ecological resilience. When you create something that is structurally complex, it allows for different size classes of species, different types of species, different places for things to hide. And so then that whole system becomes ecologically resilient. So if there's an event that disturbs them, a damage, a storm, a spill, a shipwreck, they can bounce back because there is that resilience built into that habitat. And then we also have some material innovations that we're working on. So a lot of our nonprofit clients, for example, like these shell bags where they put oyster shells in bags, put them out. It's great for awareness in the community. You can get the community involved, but they're plastic. And so it kind of conflicts with their mission. So there's a huge interest out there for coming up with non-plastic alternatives. So we're looking at non-plastic alternatives that you can make these shell bags out of. So that's separate from our other work, but it's still in line with our mission of trying to create better technologies for this space. We're also looking at some technologies where we can take dredge material and turn it into reefs. And so not just sand, but like the muddy, mucky stuff that everybody finds hard to get rid of, or even contaminated dredge materials. Can you take that, bind up all the contaminants, but make it into a reef or a coastal protection structure?
You talked to me about biochar too. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that our dry former allows us to do is utilize different types of materials. One, because there's no mixing involved in the way that we do it. So you can use things that have been traditionally hard to do in wet cast type of fabrication. So we can mix in a large amounts of biochar, which biochar is really interesting material. It's gained a lot of press recently because it allows you to sequester carbon. It's basically carbon. So if you can bind that up, then you are sequestering carbon for long periods of time. So it's being used in agriculture, and other people have even tried to put it in cement. The problem is that it breaks up the strength of the cement pretty quickly because of having to mix it and the water retention of it. So we can mix in higher concentrations of that. But some of the even more interesting things about biochar is it will absorb really nasty things that are hard to get rid of out of the water, like PFAS, which people are starting to talk more about, or the nutrients that are causing damage in the ecosystems when there's too much of it, like phosphates, and even can take up heavy metals and things like that. So it's not just the carbon aspect of it, but I think it's also the water quality aspects. It has big benefits. So we've done some studies where we've mixed biochar and other types of materials into the mix to create really high surface area structures that then water can pass through to see how much it cleans up the water. And our preliminary results of that have been very positive. We still have more R&D to go on that, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity there with these types of materials.
And biochar is, as I understand, it's rice husk. So there's a lot of it.
It can be pretty much any type of plant material that's been charred. So they basically burn it in zero oxygen. It can be its own power source, but then it creates this positive output.
Is there one project that you've worked on to date that gets you excited?
There's a project we're doing in Hawaii right now that I'm pretty excited about. It's a coral project, and I fell in love with the ocean diving on corals. But we're repairing. It's called Reef Frame is the name of the project, and it's kind of a play on words. We're reframing how you can do coral restoration. It's also a reef frame that we're going to plant corals onto as a nursery. And so this nursery will eventually become a permanent reef, but it's going to serve a larger reef community as well. And the idea of what we're doing is we're taking a whole ecosystem approach, and we're creating all of these spaces within the reef that has space for urchins and the smaller reef fish and some of these specific habitat types that accommodate those beneficial species that can keep the corals healthy as they're in the nursery, but also allowing for areas for natural settlement of other corals that will eventually turn it into its own reef. And so as we're seeing reef destruction in different places and degradation of the overall reef structure, could this be a new way forward for how we can restore these reefs in the future?
Yeah. Who is a client for restructuring a reef for rebuilding? That's a nonprofit?
It's a nonprofit, federal agencies. So FEMA just designated coral reefs as infrastructure. We're starting to look at what does that look like to start to rebuild some of this natural infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so the federal government really is looking into this, and there's a number of programs out there specifically for this. The Department of Defense is looking at this because it's a national security risk, right? When their bases are being eroded away, and they had natural infrastructure there before, and now it's been degraded, and now they're at risk. And if you combine that with things like sea level rise and storms, now there's some very big risk associated with that.
Well, I think it's really interesting, and it's something that we don't think too much about because it's a little bit counterintuitive when you're losing your seawall to think that the seawall is not the most important thing to be thinking about right now. It's a place out in the ocean. I don't know how many feet out. You would know that better than I do, but it's not necessarily adjacent. It's it's in the distance. Like the first buffer needs to come further out.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, we like to draw lines and say, this is where my property is, or this is, because it's a known thing, but the ocean doesn't care about that line. It's
Right.
going to blow past it. And,
Right.
there's different dynamics within the ocean that develop when you have these types of offshore structures. I mean, in coastal engineering, it's very well known that if you put a structure offshore, it's going to affect how the waves move in. And we've learned how to shape those structures and put those structures where they bend the waves and dissipate the waves in a certain way to produce a known result that we want. Well, nature learned that way before us. And so, the surfers have learned that as well, to know where to go, where the reefs are, and how to catch breaks and things when they're surfing. So it's a well-known thing. It's just, can we use that to our advantage?
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. I'd like to thank Gulf of Maine Research Institute and Bold Ocean Ventures for their support of Happy Planet Podcast. GMRI and Bold Ocean Ventures have partnered to create a mission-driven venture capital fund supporting the growth of innovative, sustainable, ocean-related businesses. Listeners may remember Patrick Breeding, who was on our show last year to talk about Marin Skincare and its clinically proven formula that uses glycoproteins from Maine lobsters to treat eczema and dry, damaged skin. This company has since become wildly successful with their lobster lotion, and Patrick is inviting listeners to a 20% discount on their products by using the coupon code HAPPYPLANET on their website, Marin Skincare. I actually use this product myself, and I highly recommend it. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Hey, and I want to give a quick shout out to all of the blue economy folks out there. Do not miss the Oceanovation Festival on June 19th and 20th in The Hague, Netherlands. Join over 450 global innovators, investors, and experts transforming the blue economy for a healthier ocean. For more information, visit their website, oceanovation.live. Welcome back to the podcast. What about permitting? I mean, is it hard to get permits to put these types of structures in?
Well, I think, unfortunately, permitting regulation has not caught up with where we are now. And I think that's changing. We see, there's huge advocates out there that are working to get the policy more in line with this. But policy moves slow, and the regulations are driven by that policy. And so sometimes in certain situations, it can be hard to get these types of things permitted because people are just used to putting up a bulkhead. So in a lot of places, that bulkhead may be the easier thing to do permitting wise. Just go above mean high water, put a wall in, and that solves your problem, right? The problem is it may not be as resilient as you think it is.
Have you had other sorts of pushback along the way? I understand that the permitting can sometimes be difficult. God knows, even just getting an oyster farm permit was a very long struggle.
Yeah, I think things are getting easier. Like I mentioned before, people didn't trust the nature, but now people are seeing the benefits of that. But, there's still some questions from people. It's like, well, I know that if I put a big structure here, it's going to be stable, right? How stable is the oyster reef going to be, over long term? Is that really going to protect my shoreline? And I think as people see that working, I think it's going to be adopted more, but people kind of have to see it. And it takes a little while to see that happen. But we have a structure that we put out early on that has been hit by major hurricanes on the open Gulf Coast. And just adjacent to it were rock structures, rock breakwaters that have been out there since the 90s. Well, a Cat 4 hurricane hits right at this site. The rock breakwaters, the tops of them were sheared off, the land was scoured out and eroded back. But where these oyster reefs were, not a single one moved, and the land behind it was protected.
Amazing.
And so, as people see more of that, they're going to say, okay, I get it. I would like that. Not just because it works, it's beautiful, it's more in line with nature. Like it's more cost effective because when you're overbuilding these big structures, they're extremely expensive. And you might be able to do a nature-based solution for a third of the cost.
We have to invite nature back in.
Exactly.
So we can coexist.
Yeah. I'm very optimistic about how we're going to adapt. I think we're realizing that we've got some issues to address here. But when I see the young people, and I talk to young people, most people are very aware that there's an issue here, and most want to do something about it. And that's very encouraging. And as we develop more technologies in this, there's a whole category now called NatrX that's sprung up, and it's out of this need to solve problems in nature like this. And I think there's growing awareness, but there's also a growing movement towards developing technologies in this space. When we came into this space, there was not very many competitors, and we're seeing more and more competitors. And we see that as a positive thing because it's all going to build, right? And I think that as we put more minds behind this, as more interest and resources go into this, there are going to be things possible that we never thought possible that happen in this space. I'm for sure of that. And so as we look forward, I'm very hopeful that we're going to learn to live in more harmony with nature instead of battling it constantly, right, and feeling like it's overtaking us or we're overtaking it.
Well, I think about what you're doing, and it makes me think, just to create some like equivalencies, you're sort of like the gut bacteria of coastal resilience, or the phage of coastal resilience, where we're looking to human health and immune systems, like alternatives to some of our practices with, antibiotics. Let's not use antibiotics. Let's not try to solve these coastal problems with steel walls, but let's look at how we can harness the power of nature to help have a better impact and happier outcome. So it's very cool.
I think that's a really interesting way to put it. And I think that as we learn more, I think we're definitely going to get to the point where we can say, yeah, these types of actions set off another set of reactions. We're switching the equilibrium of the system. You have a degrading system. How do you switch it into a prograding, healthy, resilient system? Mm-hmm. And we're learning how to do that more and more.
It's not just God's work.
Yeah.
It's our work to get this to help nature.
That's right.
So Matt, this is a business podcast. So can you tell me a little bit about the money? How does the breakdown? What kind of revenue can you make from one of these projects?
Well, the projects are getting bigger, and I think I'd mentioned before about how much of the shoreline is being hardened. And if you look at that, it's like 100 miles a year is being hardened just in the United States. Wow. And that's new construction. And so that's projects that people are putting up bulkheads or revetments. And if you look at that, that's 25 to 50 million a year just in that. But then if you look at the jobs that are coming out that are in addition to that regular hardening, regularly you're seeing these $100 million jobs. In the Great Lakes, they just built $160 million shoreline protection project.
Wow.
Multiple cities have multi-million, even billion-dollar projects that are for resilience and stabilizing those shorelines. Rebuilding reefs in Puerto Rico, there's a $40 million FEMA project that's out there to restore the reefs. And you're seeing more of these come up over time. And so if you look at reef restoration globally, if you look at the numbers the UN is putting out and the G20, it's in the trillions.
Wow.
Of just the restoration, what it's going to take to do that restoration.
Yeah. So you may be hiring. I know where to go looking for a job. Well, that's amazing. It's really heartening to hear that there's good money in doing good. Like, I find that so
Absolutely.
exciting. I just find that
Yeah.
so exciting. You don't have to be selling sugared cereals to people. You can actually be doing something really positive in nature that's a win-win.
Definitely. And I think that it makes good sense to do it, right? Just like when we built the railroads here, it made good sense to build railroads because we wanted to create commerce. That was doing
Yeah.
good then.
Yeah.
Now doing good is building back our natural infrastructure.
Yeah. I think that's really important to mention too, because I think, we're really, it feels like we've done a big whack over the head to nature, but some of that, the early intentions was to do good, and we just went
Sure.
too far. So, gas and oil, we all want to get rid of it, but gas and oil at that time shrunk the world. It created heated homes. It made us safer. It did all these wonderful things. We just went too far, and now we have to, retract and repair. But I think that's a really nice, you know, way to put it, because I think that we're at another one of these frontiers where we're going to have some radical change, and we're going to make some mistakes along the way too that other future generations are going to have to repair. But it's all, there's more give and take than I think people want to give credit for in some of our analysis.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit, what inspired you to get into all of this?
Well, I mentioned that I fell in love with the ocean, with diving on reefs and just being in the water, and growing up around the water, seeing the communities that made their living on the water. It's something that hits me deep down in my soul, to be honest. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and then I learned that I was good at math and solving problems. And I said, well, I can actually be an active participant in solving some of these things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's been a journey ever since, but it's always kind of gone back to, like, how do we come up with solutions for the environment, but also the people that are living in those environments and depend on those environments.
Yeah. Where's your company now? You've got a couple big clients. You've got like big, household name clients. What are your plans? Are you raising money?
So we just finished our seed round, and so with that money, we're scaling up mainly our production capabilities. And so we just opened up a resilience center in South Louisiana, and we're industrializing our processes and scaling it up. As we're doing that, we're learning a lot too about what does that look like to scale. Where, from a business perspective, what's the low hanging fruit that we get the biggest bang for our buck out of?
Yeah.
And how do we just start refining and taking away at those things that are just going to make us more efficient and able to produce more consistently and at larger and larger scales. And I think that is how we're going to move the needle too in the industry, is as we make this more efficient, we're competing with the traditional solutions, and we're seeing more and more how we can, from a cost perspective, outcompete the traditional solutions. And that when you start hitting people's bottom line of, like, yeah, we can do this not only better, but cheaper, it's not really even a sell at that point. It sells itself.
Right. But I mean, all these environmental solutions have to make economic sense. They can't just be,
that's right,
be luxury items. Otherwise, we'll never get very far.
Yeah.
I like to ask everybody who comes on the show if they're optimistic about our future to stay ahead of the climate pressures. What do you think? You're in the middle of it.
Yeah, well, I think I said it a minute ago. I'm very optimistic, and it is very encouraging to see the tailwinds that we're getting. We are starting to get a lot more people looking into this space, and And the most exciting thing is the young people who are looking to this area. A lot of my colleagues in other industries are talking about how hard it is to find labor. And we haven't had that problem because people really want to work in this space. They see the problems that are out there and they want to solve them. And if we have that kind of interest going into the future, I think we're going to solve these problems.
And they might get to dive on a coral reef.
And they might get to dive on a coral reef on the job.
It's hard to argue with that. I don't know, investment banking or building coral reefs. Well, that's great. I like that. And for some of those young people that are starting businesses today and are interested in this nature tech, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Well, I would say keep going. Don't let others tell you it can't be done because they probably have never done it. Right. And there'll be a lot of people that tell you can't do it, and you just need to keep moving forward. And as you do that, you'll find like-minded people that will encourage you along the way. And before you know it, you might even be starting a whole movement. So keep moving forward. And
don't listen to your teachers.
Don't listen to your teachers. That's right.
That was so interesting. And I really wish you well with all of this. Keep on building those beautiful, beautiful coral reefs.
Thank you, Abigail. It was a pleasure.
It may be counterintuitive to think about building a reef in order to protect your house from the ocean, but it may actually be the best solution there is. NatrX is demonstrating time and again that harnessing the power of nature can be an incredible tool in building resilience in our coastal communities. To learn more about Matt and NatrX, feel free to check out our show notes. Thank you once again for listening. Please follow Happy Planet wherever you tune in and leave us a rating and review. It really does help new listeners discover the show. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by me, Abigail Carroll. I'm also the executive producer. Kendra Hanna is our sound editor, and composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetpodcast.com.